If I told you that one of the strongest predictors of whether someone confidently denies climate science wasn't their level of education or, how many science classes they took,
Right.
or even what political party they vote for, but actually how they feel about women, would you believe me?
It does sound completely absurd when you first hear it.
It sounds wild, right? But I mean, think about it. Have you ever found yourself in a conversation where you present someone with just an absolute mountain of undeniable, rigorously tested evidence, and they just look back at you completely unbothered and say, nah, I know better?
Oh, yeah. It's incredibly common.
It is a profoundly frustrating experience. It just defies logic entirely.
Yeah.
You find yourself wondering how someone can look at a global scientific consensus and just feel entirely confident dismissing it. Well, welcome to the Deep Dive. We are thrilled to have you with us today because we are going to be exploring that exact frustration.
Specifically when it comes to climate change.
Exactly. And our mission today is to explore a brand new, peer-reviewed 2025 study published in the journal Climatic Change. The researchers, Benegal and Miria R. Holman, they set out to investigate this stubborn persistence of denial.
And they uncovered a really, truly surprising psychological link.
Yeah, they found that hostile sexism and overconfidence are basically acting as these massive hidden gears turning the public's views on climate change.
It is a phenomenal paper.
Yeah.
Mostly because it takes two areas of human psychology that, on the surface at least, might seem completely unrelated to the average person, and it proves a very strong, very measurable connection between them.
It really does. Now, before we get into the exact mechanics of how this works, I need to make something very clear to you, the listener, because this study deals directly with politically charged concepts, specifically partisanship, like Democrats versus Republicans, and social beliefs, like sexism.
Right, it's sensitive territory.
Exactly. So we need to be explicit here. This deep dive is not endorsing any political side. We aren't here to make moral judgments or preach at you. Our goal today is strictly to unpack the data and impartially report what the original source material reveals about human psychology.
We are literally just the messengers for the peer-reviewed data.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. Before we can even begin to talk about gender attitudes or social beliefs, we have to define the specific type of ignorance the study is measuring. Because, as the researchers point out, it isn't just a simple lack of facts, is it?
No, it's really not. I mean, if it were just a lack of facts, providing more facts would solve the problem, right?
Right, which we know doesn't work.
Exactly. What the researchers are looking at is a very specific psychological phenomenon regarding how people hold their false beliefs. In the scientific literature, this is known as meta-ignorance.
Meta-ignorance. So is that like ignorance about your own ignorance?
Precisely. You can think of it as a specific, highly potent manifestation of the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
Where people overestimate their own abilities.
Right. It describes individuals who not only confidently endorse misinformation, but who simultaneously believe that they actually know more about the topic than actual credentialed experts.
Wow.
Yeah, they don't just think the experts are wrong. They honestly believe they possess a superior understanding of the field.
But I'm assuming this phenomenon is pretty rare, right? Climate science is incredibly complex. It involves atmospheric physics, oceanography, just thousands of data points. Surely, most people recognize they aren't climate scientists, even if they disagree with the policy.
Well, you would think so, but the baseline data actually tells a different story.
Really?
Yeah. The researchers started by looking at the 2020 American National Election Study, or ANES, which is this massive nationally representative survey of the U.S. population.
Okay.
In that data, they found that about 9% of Americans confidently dismissed climate science.
Wait, almost 1 in 10?
Yes. Specifically, these respondents agreed with the blatantly false statement that world temperatures have not risen in the last 100 years, and they expressed moderate or high confidence in that completely incorrect answer.
Okay, so nearly 1 in 10 Americans are completely dismissive and highly confident about it. That's wild. But the researchers didn't just rely on that national survey, did they? They ran their own targeted research to measure this meta-ignorance directly.
They did. They conducted an original survey in 2020 using a platform called Lucid.
Lucid, right.
Yeah, which allows researchers to poll a very specific representative cross-section of the public. They had over 2,000 respondents, and they explicitly asked them to assess their own climate knowledge relative to actual climate scientists.
And what did that reveal? Because that takes some nerve.
The results were quite striking, actually. Roughly a quarter of the respondents exhibited this overconfidence.
A quarter?
Yeah. Just over 13.5% believed they knew about the same as climate scientists.
Oh, wow.
And roughly 12.15% believed they knew more than climate scientists about the global climate.
Let's just pause and let that sink in for you listening. A quarter of the people surveyed believe they are on par with, or literally intellectually superior to, people who spend their entire lives studying the climate.
It's staggering.
So meta-ignorance is like that person at a dinner party who watched a single 5-minute YouTube video and is now aggressively trying to debate a neurosurgeon on brain anatomy.
What's fascinating here is that your dinner party analogy perfectly tracks with what researchers have observed in other scientific domains.
Oh, it does.
Yeah. The paper notes that previous studies, like one by Mata and colleagues from 2018, found this exact same meta-ignorance in anti-vaccine attitudes.
You're interesting.
People with incredibly low objective knowledge about vaccines were highly confident that they knew more than medical doctors, and that led them to strongly endorse anti-vaccine policies.
Oh, that makes sense.
Benegal and Holman just wanted to see if this same powerful, irrational mechanism was at play with global warming.
Okay, so a quarter of people think they are climate experts. We've established that. But where is that supreme, unearned confidence actually coming from? The researchers decided to test hostile sexism.
Yes, they did.
And honestly, when I first read the outline for this study, I was baffled. I mean, what does resentment toward women have to do with atmospheric carbon? It feels like testing someone's favorite ice cream flavor to determine their driving ability. It just seems completely disconnected.
It absolutely seems disconnected at first glance. I had the same reaction. To understand the bridge between those two things, we first need to look at how the researchers measured hostile sexism and what that metric actually represents psychologically.
Okay. So how did they measure it?
They used established survey items from a psychological tool called the Ambivalent Sexism Inventory. They asked respondents to rate their agreement with statements like, women interpret innocent remarks as sexist, and women seek to gain power by getting control over men.
So they aren't just asking, do you like women? They are measuring a very specific kind of resentment. They are measuring whether someone believes women are actively trying to upend the social order and take power away from men.
Exactly. And that is the crucial link. The underlying psychological theory here connects back to what researchers call system-justifying beliefs.
System-justifying beliefs. What does that mean exactly?
The idea is that human beings have a deep psychological motivation to protect the current socioeconomic order, especially if they benefit from it or if it deeply aligns with their identity. They want to defend the status quo from any perceived threats.
And in this framework, climate action is viewed as a threat to that socioeconomic order.
A massive threat. Think about the policies required to address climate change.
Like rapid decarbonization.
Right. Transitioning away from fossil fuels, regulating major industries, restructuring global supply chains. These represent huge disruptions to existing capitalist and industrial structures.
Yeah, they do.
And historically, those industrial structures have deeply entrenched and reinforced specific economic advantages and traditional gender hierarchies.
Okay, I'm starting to see the invisible thread here. The paper brings in a really compelling concept to explain this, cited from a scholar named Cara Daggett called Petro Masculinity.
Ah, yes. Petro Masculinity.
Can you break down how Petro Masculinity actually works in the mind?
Definitely. It explores how patriarchal norms are deeply intertwined with spaces that rely heavily on fossil fuel extraction. In these cultural spaces, fossil fuels aren't just a utility or an energy source. They are central to the formation of identity.
So it's more than just a job.
Exactly. The extraction of oil and coal, the massive machinery, the industrial workforce, it is all deeply tied to traditional rugged masculinity. Providing for a family through industrial labor becomes a core part of what it means to be a traditional man in these contexts.
I see. So for individuals who hold strong system-justifying beliefs, like the hostile sexism measured in the survey, a threat to fossil fuels isn't just an energy policy debate. It registers in their brain as a direct threat to their preferred social hierarchy and their own identity.
Yes, exactly. Furthermore, the study points out that opponents of climate action often weaponize this deliberately.
How so?
They will intentionally feminize environmental concerns to delegitimize them in the eyes of those who hold sexist views.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, think about the cultural tropes around environmentalism. Reusable bags, vegan diets, caring for nature.
Right.
These are often culturally coded as soft or feminine behaviors. Rejecting climate action, rolling coal in a diesel truck, or mocking environmentalists becomes a way to publicly perform traditional masculinity and reject the changing social order.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I imagine you listening to this might be thinking what I was thinking when I reached this point in the research.
Yeah.
I was thinking, wait, hold on. Are we overcomplicating this? Is the study just saying that people who score high on the sexism scale happen to have less formal education? Or maybe they just haven't been exposed to the actual scientific facts about the climate. Like, are they just generally uninformed across the board, and that's why they're getting the climate questions wrong and holding outdated social views?
That is the exact logical pushback the researchers anticipated.
Yeah.
And the way they tested that assumption is what makes this study an absolute breakthrough. In the Lucid survey, they didn't just ask people how confident they were, they actually tested their objective climate knowledge.
Oh, they actually gave them a test.
Yes, they gave respondents a 6-question true or false quiz. They used established facts based on findings from NASA and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
So real science questions.
Right. For example, they asked if respondents knew that nitrous oxide is a greenhouse gas. They wanted to see, objectively, who actually knew the science.
And what did that knowledge test reveal about the people who scored high on the hostile sexism scale? Did they fail the quiz?
This is the counterintuitive finding that flips everything on its head. Hostile sexism did not correlate with a lack of objective climate knowledge.
Wait, really?
I really want to emphasize that.
Yeah.
Holding hostile sexist views did not mean someone was less informed about the physical facts of climate change. Furthermore, sexism didn't even strongly correlate with simply making a mistake and endorsing climate misinformation.
Then what did it correlate with?
The statistical models showed that hostile sexism exclusively correlated with overconfidence.
So let me translate that. The math showed us something crazy. Being sexist didn't mean they knew less about the climate. They knew the facts just as well as anyone else. But holding those sexist views gave them the sheer audacity to think they knew more than everyone else.
Exactly. The hostility was purely fueling the ego. The data points from the study illustrate this beautifully.
Give me the numbers.
If a respondent in a Lucid survey was at the absolute lowest end of the hostile sexism scale, they only had about a 12.6% chance of believing they knew as much or more than scientists.
Okay, 12.6%.
But if a respondent was at the absolute highest end of the hostile sexism scale, that likelihood jumped to 36.2%.
Whoa. From 12.6% to 36.2%, that is a massive, almost threefold increase in overconfidence, directly tied to how heavily they resent women seeking power.
It is a massive jump.
And the researchers checked the math on this to make sure it wasn't just a fluke, right?
Yes, they rigorously controlled for other variables to make sure this wasn't a statistical illusion.
Like what kind of variables?
They ran the models controlling for the respondents' level of education, their gender, and their partisanship, whether they identify as a Democrat or a Republican.
So they stripped all that away?
They stripped all those traditional factors away. And even with all those factors accounted for, the strong, significant relationship between hostile sexism and climate meta-ignorance held true. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it proves that this specific type of social prejudice is acting as an entirely independent psychological engine driving anti-consensus views.
Wow. I think I'm starting to really grasp the why here. Let me try to synthesize this for the listener. So the hostility isn't causing a lack of knowledge, it's acting like a psychological shield. The sexism is fueling the audacity to think you know better than an expert, because admitting the expert is right means admitting your preferred social hierarchy has to change.
That is exactly the mechanism. The deep emotional tie to a particular way the world is structured causes selective acceptance or rejection of reality. The overconfidence we are seeing in the data isn't born from actual learned expertise. It is born from the desperate need to protect a worldview.
So, what does this all mean? Having established this fascinating and honestly quite alarming psychological mechanism where system justification drives meta-ignorance, we have to look at the tangible consequences.
Right, because this has real-world impacts.
Exactly, because this doesn't just live in the abstract realm of survey data and psychological theory. This translates into physical action in the real world. How does this arrogant attitude impact our laws and our national policy?
To answer that, the researchers looked at the final phase of the American National Election Study findings. They wanted to see how the combination of meta-ignorance and hostile sexism impacted actual boots-on-the-ground views on climate policy.
And what did they find?
The statistical correlations were entirely negative. Individuals exhibiting these traits were statistically far less likely to agree that climate change is an important issue in the first place.
Well, that's not surprising.
Right. They were also significantly less likely to believe that climate change is currently impacting the extreme weather events we see in the United States.
So they just completely deny what's happening outside their window. And what about actually doing something about it? Regulating the emissions that cause the warming?
As you might expect, these individuals were strongly opposed to greenhouse gas regulations. The researchers found consistent and substantive decreases in the likelihood of policy support as sexism or meta-ignorance increased.
So the more sexist and overconfident they were, the more they hated the regulations.
Exactly. When someone holds inaccurate beliefs about climate change and does so overconfidently while holding system-justifying sexist beliefs, they become highly resistant to any mitigative climate action. They view the regulations not as environmental protection, but as an attack on their way of life.
But earlier we mentioned that the truly dismissive folks only make up a small portion, right? And those scoring highest on hostile sexism are also a minority. If they are a minority, why does this matter so much for national policy? Why can't the majority just outvote them?
This raises an important question about how democracies actually function, and the study's discussion section addresses it directly. They point to a concept in political science known as the minority rule.
The minority rule.
Yeah. While these overconfident, system-justifying individuals do make up a minority of the overall public, their views are deeply entrenched. Because their beliefs are tied directly to their identity and their perceived social dominance, they operate with asymmetrical passion.
Asymmetrical passion, meaning they care a lot more intensely about this specific issue than the average person does.
Precisely. They are often far more vocal, more organized, far more resistant to compromise, and much more active in obstructing vital policy than the majority who simply accepts the scientific consensus and moves on with their day.
That makes a lot of sense.
The intense identity-driven minority can easily impose a tyranny over the more passive majority opinion, effectively paralyzing legislative action. It fundamentally changes how we must view these public debates.
I'd like you, the listener, to imagine being in a car hurtling toward a cliff. The person who knows the least about driving is fighting the mechanic for the steering wheel. Not because they know the route, but because they are terrified of losing their status as the quote-unquote leader of the car.
That is a brilliant analogy.
Yeah.
It really captures the desperation.
It changes how you view everything. When you see a fierce, red-faced argument over climate policy on the news or in a town hall, it isn't actually a debate over carbon parts per million. It isn't a debate over the accuracy of ocean temperature gauges.
No, it's not.
It is a profound cultural battle over social dominance. The science is merely the battleground they have chosen to fight on.
And the research shows that correcting misinformation is uniquely difficult, if not entirely impossible, when the misinformation is serving a deeply protective psychological purpose for the individual holding it.
Which brings us right back to you, listening right now. If you have ever felt completely overwhelmed or just emotionally exhausted by trying to argue facts with someone who just won't listen, this deep dive finally explains why.
It's validating, in a way.
It is. Throwing more data, more complex charts, and more IPCC reports at a meta-ignorant person won't work. It fails every time because their denial isn't rooted in data in the first place. It is rooted in system justification and identity.
Exactly. You can't use a spreadsheet to cure someone's deep-seated fear of losing their social status.
That is the ultimate takeaway. Recognizing the actual source of the obstruction allows us to stop wasting energy on the wrong tactics. But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought from the study's discussion section to mull over on your own.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
Because this overconfidence and hostility doesn't just spontaneously generate in a vacuum. The researchers point out that political elites and media figures frequently use sexist language and specific framing to deliberately prime these exact attitudes.
It is a highly effective, highly intentional strategy.
Right, they cultivate the meta-ignorance. Understanding that these messaging campaigns are successful precisely because they tap into underlying prejudices, like sexism, is a major step in recognizing the mechanics of modern climate obstruction.
It really pulls the curtain back on how public opinion is manipulated.
It changes everything about how you hear those arguments.
Yeah.
So next time you see a pundit on the news or a talking head on social media mocking a climate policy, or using derogatory gendered language to describe environmentalists, ask yourself, are they actually debating the climate? Or are they deliberately using gendered authoritarian language to manufacture meta-ignorance and protect the fossil fuel status quo?
It's a question we all need to be asking.
That brick wall of denial you've been arguing with, it isn't made of ignorance, it's made of identity. I want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the psychology of climate denial. Keep questioning your assumptions, but more importantly, keep questioning unearned overconfidence. Stay curious, and we will catch you next time.